Hello everyone, welcome to another patron-voted shmup review. Today I am discussing Raiden Fighters Aces on the Xbox 360. You'll notice that I am holding my microphone today. That's because I recently upgraded my audio equipment and it gave me a little bit more freedom and leeway with what I can do with my microphone. So I thought, hey, why don't I try giving it a hold for a change? Maybe make it a little bit more dynamic. I'm not completely locked into place. We'll see how it goes. I'm kind of excited for the change. But anyway, today I'm discussing Raiden Fighters Aces because that was chosen in the patron voted shmup review. I think by a pretty slim margin. There was some heavy competition this month, but a winner is a winner, and I am excited because this has been a collection and series of games I have been wanting to talk about for quite a while. For those who tune into my podcast episodes or some of my previous videos, you all will know that Raiden holds a very special place in my heart in the world of shmups because for many, many years of my life, Raiden 2 is basically the prototypical shmup in my mind. If you said the word shmup, I thought of Raiden 2. It was basically one of the few arcade shmups I ever played in my life. I remember growing up going to arcades and just feeding quarters to the Raiden 2 cabinet. And I think among my North American brethren, the Raiden series has probably been the most popular and the most accessible to get their hands on. So I can imagine a lot of people would be excited to get to know this collection a little better. And so what is Raiden Fighters Aces? For a long time, I actually thought this was just a game. I thought it was its own sort of unique new title. It actually isn't. It's a collection of 3 Raiden Fighters games in a collection. So it is not an individual game to clear up the confusion for a lot of people. Instead, what it includes is Raiden Fighters 1, Raiden Fighters 2, and then Raiden Fighters Jet, because you gotta have a cool subtitle for the third one, right? And so with all that said, let's dig into the first impressions of this collection because whenever you're looking at a collection of shmups, that always gets me a little bit nervous, to be honest, because normally how it goes with these sorts of collections, as we've seen on the Switch with the Psycho collection, for example, is that developers will usually just throw the games onto the console or onto the port or whatever it is and just kind of let you at it. The emulation will usually be really spotty, inaccurate, and it's just more of a bargain type of mentality rather than something like M2 where they tend to focus in on one game, at least the Shot Triggers team, and give it a real special treatment. Or even previous ports in the past, usually if they're an individual port, they tend to be better than collections. There are collections that break this rule, of course, but for the most part, that tends to be how it plays out. And so I was a little bit nervous coming into this because, I'm notorious for being pretty hard on ports when it comes to their accuracy, when it comes to their input lag, when it comes to the extras they offer, all that good stuff. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by what this package has to offer because this thing is a pretty thorough port. I was very impressed by how much love and care seemed to be given to this game, even with the UI options, with the video options, with the training options. So let's get into those more specifically. First of all, let's talk about the video modes because this was actually really interesting and it involved me doing some research to figure more about. So basically, when you go into the video modes, there's an option for game speed and it has a number of different selections you can do. One is 60 FPS. Do not use this option. This is basically running the game almost 10% around there, about 10% faster than it should be. The game runs at 54 frames per second natively, which is surprisingly low for a shmup, but hey, it is what it is. That is the arcade speed, 54 FPS. So bumping that up to 60 is a pretty big deal, and especially with a game like Raiden where those bullet speeds are already fast, you're going to have even faster bullet speeds in 60 FPS mode. So for that, I say no, don't do that. So then there's some other options that were pretty interesting and took a little sleuthing to figure out what they were. The first one is 54 frames per second blend. So this is sort of, I'm guessing, kind of like a VSync type of thing or triple buffering, something in there where it runs it at 54 frames per second, but then sort of blends it into running at 6. The way they describe this in the documentation is incredibly vague, so I'm not entirely sure how this works on a technical level. How do you blend 2 frame rates together exactly? But I do know when you play it back on a modern monitor, it reads 60 FPS. And I thought, maybe that's just through the HDMI. So I ran it through analog, Cool fun fact, the OSSC can actually tell you the frame rate of analog signals. If you're ever wondering, hey, how do I check the frame rate of something that has an analog signal? The OSSC can actually tell you. So I ran it through my OSSC, 59.18 or whatever it is. So basically 60 FPS there. So it's basically running at 60 FPS with VSync, I'm assuming, in some kind of strange one. The next one is true. And so my thinking was, oh, this might be it running the game at 54 frames per second natively, right? I am not sure if that is the case or not. I suspect it sort of is. So what's going on is that when you run it in true mode, again, checking the frame rate and checking the frame rate on my monitor or on the OSSC, both are coming back at 60. But when you play it, I feel like it has a little bit of this chunkiness to it, to where it is running at 54 frames per second in some fashion. The input lag seems lower. So this was the mode that I played on. I played on true mode. And then the last one is wait. And I thought, wait is tricky because some ports, wait means slowdown. For instance, on the Dodonpachi PS1 port, if you put wait on, it adds artificial slowdown. When you turn wait off, it removes slowdown. I had to check into some interview with the developers to figure out what this meant. This means it's another weird VSync triple buffer type thing where it holds the frame or something. It's described in this interview a little bit where it's holding the frame. So I'm thinking this is another VSync option, just a different style of VSync. So in the end, I ended up going with true. You might want to play around with blend or wait to see. I would suspect the way to go is true, and then if you're not enjoying true, go with blend. That would be my assumption. But unfortunately, there's very little explanation of what these modes are. I even dug through the manual to see, like, hey, does the manual explain this? The game manual does not explain it. Nowhere is this explained. So, yeah, if anyone has any further information other than what I dug up from the interview or what I dug up in the manual, let me know. But from what I could find, this is as much information as I got. So for me, I went with the true mode. Don't do 60 FPS though, I can tell you that much. So those are the video options. I was also really impressed with the scanline options because you can have all kinds of different scanline sizes. And my favorite part, and I think more ports should do this, is you're able to adjust the brightness and adjust the thickness of the scanlines. I really appreciate that because I personally like a sort of thin, light scanline. Nothing too heavy, nothing too intrusive, just a nice scanline over the top. You know, on the M2 ports, I always do 25%. On the OSSC, I can't remember, like a 12 or 15%, something like that. I like a nice, light scanline feature, and this you're able to achieve there, so that was really cool. Of course, you're able to rotate the monitor. It'd be pretty ridiculous if you couldn't do that, but some ports, like Instant Brain Dodonpachi, don't allow you to play Tate, which is pretty dumb, but this game, you're allowed to do that. So all that stuff's really good. And overall, I was really impressed with the amount of options you have in the game. For instance, even in arcade mode, you're able to adjust the stage order and all that good stuff so you can do it fixed rather than having the random stages, which I think most people are not going to want to do. They have a real attention to detail here that impressed me by quite a bit. Most of my footage here was gathered through the training mode, and I'm a big fan of this training mode. It isn't perfect, but for the era it was released in, I think it is very well done. So the training mode allows you to choose the stage, of course. It also allows you to choose your ship, and even it reveals the hidden ships to you because Raiden has a lot of hidden stuff in it, including hidden ships, kind of like Guriga. And so you're able to access those hidden ships through the training mode menu. You don't have to do any funny codes or anything like that. And of course, if you want to play as the slave ship, it allows you to select slave, and then you can choose which slave you want to choose. And I'll explain what a slave ship is for everyone. So a slave ship is when you're normally playing Raiden in arcade mode, you're just using the default ships. Whenever you get an option, the options are these little ships, and it looks really, really cool. That's, I guess, where the idea of fighters comes from, right? Because your options are other ships. But you can actually play as those little ships if you choose the slave option. And this is basically better than playing the default ships because they are smaller and have smaller hitboxes. And so they're very good to use. Yeah, you can choose the slave in the option menu and choose which slave you want to play. They're just like little miniature versions of the regular ships they belong to. There's also these other hidden ships like the ferry, and the dragonfly or the Spyro the Dragon looking thing, which are just really good in OP. Yeah, so training mode works really well. You're also able to select up to 99 lives and 99 bombs. That may seem like kind of ridiculous, but I actually really like it because it opens up to being able to sort of move through the stage more quickly and easily, rather than, struggling against certain boss phases if you don't want to, or just having the freedom to experiment with different bomb setups and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was really forward thinking to allow you to really customize the amount of bombs and power and ships you want to use beyond just the regular amount. Oh yeah, and the input lag, let me address that real quick. So the input lag I measured actually quite a long time ago when I was initially going through and doing my batch of input lag tests on Xbox 360 shmups. And this game comes back at a really solid 3 frames per second. So the input, or 3 frames of input lag, I mean to say. So this game is average response, very solid response, like the cave ports. It's not extra laggy. That was a little concern of mine, because usually when you get ports and you get collections of ports, like the Psycho collection and other ones too, you tend to end up with more input lag for some reason. Maybe because just to make compatibility easier across the games, who knows. But in this case, 3 frames of input lag, very, very solid. I don't think I've ever seen 2 on a 360 other than Futari, where you could disable VSync, and I tested the input lag here on the 60 FPS mode. So it is potentially possible that the true could be lower input lag, but I doubt it. I think 60 FPS mode is probably going to be the lowest input lag you'll get, and then the other modes might add lag on top of it. I didn't bother to go through and test that because it didn't feel like it, and at this point you're sort of forced to play on those modes anyway, and I don't think the input lag is a concern across the board anyway. So yeah, a very responsive game input lag wise. So let's talk about these games themselves and what really sets them apart and what makes them really interesting. This may be a controversial opinion, it may not be, I'm not sure. I guess fans can weigh in here. But I personally like the Raiden Fighters series much more than the Mainline series. So I like Raiden Fighters 1, Raiden Fighters 2, and Raiden Fighters Jet better than Raiden 2, Raiden 4, especially Raiden 5. That game's not that great. But the Mainline Raiden series, I actually like the Fighter series better. I think better games overall. But again, I don't play Raiden games that intensely. I don't play them for score or anything like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if more people prefer the Raiden Fighters games. And the feel of them is very interesting, and that's something I definitely wanted to comment on. I'll talk about the individual differences between the games as we go, but they do all have a sort of cohesive feel that you can kind of generalize. So what's really tricky about Raiden for my bullet hell players out there, or even players who play a lot of classic shmup, is that Raiden has a different sort of game feel than a lot of other shmups out there, mostly due to 2 factors. The first one being the insane blazing fast bullet speeds. Raiden has some really, really fast bullets, like Psycho fast. Sometimes I feel like maybe faster than Psycho. I guess second loop Psycho in some cases. I mean, these bullets haul ass. Another thing that's really tough about Raiden, this is a criticism on my part. Maybe, if someone did another port of these games, they could do a little fix to this, is I really don't like the bullet visibility of these games. It is hard to see the bullets a lot of the time. They tend to blend in a lot with the explosions and the stuff going on around them. I mean, if you have a ship just sort of appear on screen and fire at you, it's not too bad, but those yellow bullets tend to blend in a lot with your own fire, and you're usually blowing a lot of stuff up in the game. And then when you add the speed on top of that, it's actually really hard to see the bullets for me. And I actually just a lot of times dodge as if something's shooting. That's a huge criticism of mine. I wish they added some kind of more distinctive coloring or glow effect or something onto these bullets to help the visibility. Other than that, another thing about Raiden that's really interesting and kind of throws off how the game plays compared to other shmups is the way you have to deal with the enemy formations, and the way they're sort of laid out is very unique. In a lot of shmups, you're usually, especially like Cave and that type of thing, you're usually being attacked from the top of the screen, right? And you'll have things sort of spawning on the left and right side, but usually sort of in the upper sort of area of the screen. In Raiden, you're going to be flanked on all sides, basically. You're going to be attacked from below, from above, from the left side, and from the right side. And also the stages have a little bit of a scroll to them left and right. Of course they scroll up and down, it's shmup, but they also have a little left and right scroll, and that may not seem like a big deal, but it actually is, because it manipulates the way you play the game, because you can basically take enemies off the screen by flying right and then bring them back on screen by flying left, or reverse, wherever they are on the screen. This actually matters a lot when it comes to routing. There's a lot of stages that are built upon this idea, where if you're sitting in the middle of the screen, that's actually the worst place to be. That is very different. If you go back and watch my How to Shmup videos, volume 1, I'm going over more like traditional bullet hell, that type of style of playing shmup. The idea for most shmups, even classic shmups, is to occupy the center of the screen and to sort of lay down suppressive fire from the center, because that's the max amount of area you can cover, and you give yourself nice room to move around. So default, let's say you're in between patterns or you're waiting for something to happen, you will fly to this certain sort of center point of the screen. In Raiden, I think that's a bad idea. And it took me a while to figure this out. I've been playing this over the past week or so, and when I first played the game, I thought, wow, this is one of the hardest shmups I've ever played in my life, because I was getting sniped over and over and over and over and over again, and it got really, really frustrating. My basic approach to this game is off, because it should not be this difficult, because it wasn't situations where the bullets themselves were that hard to get around, or the formations were oppressive or anything like that. It was literally like I'd be dealing with one pattern, and then a dude would spawn from the bottom left corner and just shoot me and kill me. Like, there was always just these little enemies spawning and nailing me. Basically, you feel like you're constantly in sniper's hairs. Like, if you ever play first-person shooters, even remotely competitively, or like in death matches or anything, and it's like a sniper match where 8 snipers are on the screen, and every time you turn a corner, someone's gonna headshot you. That's how it feels to play Raiden games, or the Raiden Fighters games at least, is that the bullet speeds are so fast, and also the enemies spawn, and they will just fire as they spawn, and they'll spawn below you, they'll spawn right next to you, they'll spawn above you, and the game's always sort of putting you in this crossfire. It feels very distinctive from other shmups, and I sort of developed my own strategy here, and I want to hear what my fellow players think. But what I started doing is coming up with what I call wall hugging, where, again, traditionally in shmups, you don't want to wall hug unless you have to. For instance, if the screen's open, you want to occupy the center. In Raiden, I was actually not doing that. Instead, what I was doing is I was hugging pretty close to the wall. I was basically getting close to the wall, but then letting my spread of my fire sort of give me a little bit of distance from it. But the idea being is that I'm going to constantly cover one side of the screen from spawning stuff. So whenever something spawns on the right side of the screen, it'll instantly be killed, so I can suppress the fire. And while I'm doing that, I'm watching the left side of the screen for the things that are spawning and shooting at me. And I'm mostly sort of moving up and down in these little circles. And then when there's enough stuff on the left side of the screen, I'll cross over, kill them, and then hug the left wall. So you're kind of like climbing from wall to wall to wall up the screen. When I started doing this, I found this to be much more effective than my traditional way of trying to occupy the center of the screen. Because, again, in Raiden, you're getting surrounded and constantly fired on from all sides. And so being in the middle is like bad. That's like being in the middle of an open area in a first-person shooter where everyone's behind cover with sniper rifles. And so it gives the game a really distinctive feeling. And also, there's just some habits that I had to break. Like, normally when you play bullet hells, or you play even like more classic shmups, like even Battle Greg and stuff like that, when bosses come down, what I normally do is sort of sit underneath them and sort of damage them while I wait for them to go through their patterns. And right in here, you almost always had to be sort of perpendicular to them. You didn't ever want to be directly below them, because they usually have these really fast kill patterns that they'll just fire. And usually if you're below them, they'll just hit you and kill you. Bullet ceiling in this game is very dangerous, because they will shoot you from much closer range, and they will just instant kill you if they fire, So it is a lot scarier. You have to be a lot more calculated and precise. The good thing about these Raiden games is that they do truly reward fast ships. That's why I think the Judgment, I can't remember the name of this, like Judgment something, the really fast ships are usually really, really good. And then you do the fast slave. That is very, very powerful. You don't tend to do as much damage as some of the other ships, but it is cool how the game does have a pretty large ship variety. But I do think the faster the ship, the better tends to be the case here, because you need to macro around a lot of stuff. And it's sort of an inverse of Cave, where you get rewarded for microing around stuff in Cave. In Raiden, it feels like you might be more rewarded for macroing around stuff, because usually what happens is the idea of microing around things in Cave is you stay in the center and you micro around stuff to maintain center control. And Raiden, you don't want to be in the center for most of the time, at least in my experience. You want to be sort of in the corners a little bit, so you have a little bit more reaction time for stuff spawning on the other side of the screen, and you're providing suppressive fire to the stuff. So a little bit more about the games themselves. I think Raiden Fighters 1 is probably the easiest one, but also has kind of the jankest, weirdest, fast bullet patterns. It feels a lot like you're playing a Mega Man 2 style game, where if you don't have the stages memorized, you're just going to die. I think this is the ultimate quarter stealing game in many senses. The bullet speeds are super fast, and also I think a lot of the enemy patterns are pretty unfair if you don't know the game, because they basically just spawn and fire at you, spawn beside you. There's some sort of gimmicky stages like the ship stage, but overall, I think it's probably the easiest. The last boss was surprisingly easy, which is kind of cool. I don't think there is a TLB. If there is, the training mode did not provide one, so I assume there isn't. Then after that, there's Raiden Fighters 2. I think Raiden Fighters 2 is very good. I think a big improvement over 1. You'll notice the bullet speeds are a little bit slowed down. They're a little bit toned down, to the point where you can actually dodge them on reaction a little bit more reliably. Of course, you still need to have that Raiden playstyle. Another part about the Raiden playstyle I forgot to mention is that bombs are a big deal, and you want to be preemptively bombing, much more so than reactive bombing. So in Cave games, the idea is you never preemptive bomb. You always reactive bomb to save yourself at the last minute. And while a lot of the bombs in Raiden do give you a good amount of screen coverage and also invulnerability pretty quickly, which is nice. That would be pretty brutal otherwise. They still are a little bit slow to come out when the bullets are this fast. And the idea is, because you're given so many bombs and they aren't really used for scoring all that much, like max bonuses or anything like that. The idea of Raiden is, we're going to give you bombs, use them strategically, use them for setups, use them to take out bosses, use them to preempt dangerous patterns. So what I've found myself doing a lot that seemed really effective is whenever you came into a new pattern that just had a lot of stuff surrounding you, or had a lot of guns if it's the boss, like, on the left, right, and center, I would just bomb that, damage it, and then try and fight my way through the rest of the pattern. So I guess preemptive bombs, attacking stuff early with bombs, seems to be really effective. And of course, saving a bomb for that final kill on the boss usually tends to be really good. As far as scoring in the game goes, I did a little bit of research for this. It is Raiden. So Raiden's a game all about secrets and being convoluted, and I think it's not all that different from Psycho as far as you're collecting medals and that sort of stuff. But I was looking through, and there seems to be some special medal max modes you can unlock if you have slaves. I think the idea is the more slaves you have, you can get up to 2, the higher the medals become valued. So you want to have your slaves for scoring. There seems to be this elaborate sort of setup to getting special max medal modes and all that sort of stuff. I'm not sure how popular the Raiden games are for score, but I do know that a lot of their scoring systems do tend to revolve around secrets and hidden things, rather than something like Cave, where it's all like Dononpachi, where it's all about comboing and max meters. Raiden's scoring system is much more sort of secret and complicated, and so if you want to get into Raiden scoring, I think it's pretty necessary that you watch super play videos and try and reverse engineer what they're up to, and maybe if you can find some secrets guides, that could also be really useful. I found some on the farm that was useful. I was seeing if there was rank in the game. It sounds like there is, but I never got any clarifying details on how the rank works or how to manipulate it. Again, experiment with that. You have the training mode, though. You can experiment with the rank and see if that's a big deal or not, or people in the comments can chime in about how the ranking system might work. So with that being said, I would say my favorite of the set is Raiden Fighters Jet. I think that one's the best of them. Actually, just reverse order. So Jet's my favorite, 2 is my second favorite, and then Raiden Fighters 1 is my least favorite. But as far as getting 1CCs, I think in in order is the way it goes. Start with Raiden Fighters, and then do 2, and then do Jet. I think Jet is harder, and Jet has a TLB and then a TLB after the TLB, I believe. As I was going through training mode, that's what it looked like. And so I think it is a much and it seemed to be a longer game, a much more elaborate game. So I think Jet is where it's at. It's probably the best one in the collection. Again, it's hard to tell. Another thing about these games that I wanted to point out is the ship variety, which is really cool. It's kind of like Grega or Batrider, where there's a ton of different ships to choose from and experiment with. My preference is definitely for the faster moving ships. There was one I played, I think called the Destroyer or something like that, where the thing had a lot of firepower, but it was painfully slow to use. So definitely want to go for the spear or the faster moving ships. But anyway, so my overall conclusions on this release is that I think it is absolutely fantastic. Still affordable, around 40 bucks. I saw listings for it on eBay. Probably one of the best collections I've seen in a very long time. I don't really have any issues with how it was implemented. The input lag's fine, the training mode's solid enough. Of course, you can always upgrade by having save states, and I probably, if I was going for 1cc's in these games, would use save states. But for the time it was released, having a boss select and having such a robust training mode is really impressive. The fact that you can do fixed stage order, they were really detailed, and so I gotta give it to them. I think this is overall a very good value, a very good release. Probably one of the best shmups on the 360. A lot of people don't seem to talk about it, but I think it's absolutely a very well done, fantastic release, and hopefully gave me a little bit of taste to come for when I start playing more Psycho. The Raiden games have a warm place in my heart, like I said, and so let me end this by thanking my patrons. So thank you to 72 PCT Water, Adam Pearson, Adrian Reyes, Ukshay Watker, Dingo, Andy Cap, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Corio, Daniel Savage, Delta Tango 6, Disco Star Slayer, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Geriatric Donmaku, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Meher Kalendrian, Minong, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, 9, Oklo Kugels, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Ram Q, Raul, Real Skeen, Sketchy Raccoon, The Boot Rex, TRM, Sugumo, Yishi, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.